Well, before we begin, Sarah, let me just give you a heartfelt thank you for agreeing to be on this podcast. As we were just chatting before I hit record, I can't believe I've convinced you to be on this podcast, and I think you can't believe you've agreed to be on it. But here we go. Um, for whatever reasons that we have been brought into each other's life, I am internally grateful. So, I'd love to hear and have you share what was going on in your life when you first kind of realized that you might have ADHD, you might be neurodivergent. Like, what were some of those things that you first started thinking to yourself? I should look into this.
Well, it's quite it's a hard question, that even though it maybe shouldn't be, but maybe many people say this, but for me, from when I was young, everything was off, and I really struggled to understand things, and things that people thought were simple or were straightforward. I never felt that way, and I also have to caveat that by saying that I was an alcoholic, or am an alcoholic. I've been 20 years sober, and I think that there was so much confusion in my life about what was anxiety, what was depression, what was alcoholism, what was bad behavior, what were character defects, what were all of these things that kind of I was labeled with, or had, or felt, or whatever. And then you throw sort of all these trauma analyses into it as well. I mean, so I couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. It sort of was in 2018, and where I'd been sober for almost 17 year but my life was chaos, and it just felt like I was out of control, and I was just doing so many things and traveling, but things just weren't gelling, and I was getting really confused as to what was going on. And then in typical fashion, it worked for me to sort of move around from country to country and to try and find my tribe, try and find some way to settle. And then I think really what hit me was COVID, when there was this massive shift, and everybody started talking about, in the shutdowns, I became much busier, and I became, I was sort of sitting on Zoom calls all day, and my business was very busy. But I was lonely, and I was wondering where my friends are, and I was starting to think about all of these things. And, one of the, I suppose I'm embarrassed to admit this, but one of the things that has followed me around in my business, and one of the things I suppose has been one of my biggest shame things, is the turnover of staff that I've always had since I started my business. And I started making bad people decisions because I didn't want to let anyone down. And so I would keep people that I knew weren't wrong, or I would hire people that I knew were wrong, because I didn't want to admit that I'd made a mistake. And so this shame started to really build up in me. And I couldn't work out if it was the narrative of my youth, where I'd always been told I was useless, and I was this, and I was that. And so I was really trying to figure out, because I thought I was a good person. And, I work in sort of the justice space and the humanitarian space. And I And I never felt I'd done anything wrong. I felt like I was a good person and I cared deeply about people. And yet constantly I was upsetting people, letting people down. And I really could not figure that out. And and then I started to wonder if I was going mad, like if there was like maybe I was schizophrenic or something, because there was this thing and that thing, and yet everything I did was with good intentions. And I think one of the pivotal things for me was my nephew, because I could start to see a lot of myself in him. And so then I started to think, well, hang on a minute, this isn't, you know, this isn't, like that I'm some evil person with this sort of double personality and stuff like that, because I started seeing it in other people. And also, interestingly for me, in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I started to hear a lot of people talking about some of the things that I thought were fantastic as character defects. And so there was all these sort of nuggets coming at me. And then I had a particularly bad year in, I'm trying to now work out the years, 2021, 2022. My business was really getting exploding, but I was having a massive turnover of staff. And people were really angry with me, and I was getting a lot of criticism, and I thought, you know what, I can't carry on like this. And I started trying to explain myself better, but and I just started to see my behavior, and how when people would come towards me at work, if I wasn't expecting it, I would start to lash out. And it was like, this is not right. And so I went and saw, and obviously I've had a lot of therapy in my life. In fact, I've probably spent more money on therapy than anything else in my life. And nobody had ever said anything about ADHD or neurodivergence. And so, yeah, so I went to see somebody who was, I read about in the neurodivergent space, which I didn't really understand at that stage. And so when I met them, they said, well, I think we should do a diagnosis. And of course, I was a blue-blooded ADHD, neurodivergent, ADD, da-da-da. And so that's what brought me to it, was desperation, actually.
Mm-hmm. And somebody finally being able to connect those dots for you, which I feel like that, I've spoken about that on my podcast too. If it wasn't for the fact that my therapist knew enough about ADHD, how much longer would I have gone through my life feeling like you said, like, what is wrong with me? You so perfectly articulated, by the way, that feeling where our actions don't reflect our intentions, right? And so that feeling of like, why is everybody walking around in eggshells? Why am I having such a difficult time with interpersonal relationships? But also, like, I am angry, right? And I am feeling a lot of rage. I think, rage is one of those things that a lot of us connect to, right? That feeling of like, why am I going from 0 to 100 so quickly? Yeah. So but how are we supposed to know that that has anything to do with ADHD? I mean, when we're thinking ADHD is just a little boy who can't sit still.
Well, that's where I have this big issue. And another thing that was really plaguing me and had been for a long time was how I was able to show up in the world, in sort of turning a switch on and being able to speak on stage, to run meetings brilliantly. And when I was on, I was on. But then the minute the curtains closed, I would collapse, and I would feel this dread and this guilt and all the stuff I said wrong. And, there was this complete low, which was so weird. So these highs and these really big lows. And I really started properly self-loathing, and really not understanding it. And I think, you talk about therapists, and I mean, as I say, I probably spend more money than God's got sheep on therapists through my life, and nobody had ever identified this until I went to a place that had a sign outside saying neurodivergent clinic. And by that stage, I thought, well, that covered. By that stage, I was suspecting I was autistic, but I didn't know what that meant. Mm-hmm. But I talk about this, I share about this feeling of behind closed doors. I was this absolutely terrible person, and yet I shone in the world. And I think that's been the greatest joy for me, has been bringing, once I obviously was diagnosed and started working with it and all of that, was to bring those two things together.
Yeah. When you say bring those two things together, you mean just understand that you can be both, or what do you mean by that?
So I think that, you come to understand that with what we call it is of course I forget the word. I mean, that's all part of it all. So what's menopause? What's ADHD? What's all of that?
Oh my goodness!
But
right?
with an interest-based brain, I now understand this complete switch on where everything else disappears, and when I shine. And I've been able to decipher between that what is masking, and what is just feeling low and feeling tired and feeling overwhelmed. Because, as we will know, anybody listening to this podcast who's ADHD, and I hate that term, by the way, but who's neurodivergent and menopausal, is how much we do during the day, and like our morning start at 4:30, and we can almost live a whole week, 2 weeks, month in a day. But if you can't sort of break that up and it all becomes one big mishmash, then that's what kept taking me out, and that's what was causing the burnout. And Katie, don't get me wrong, I haven't got it right yet at all. I don't think you ever get it right. From my experience, I live a much differenter life, and I live so to answer your question, what is bringing those things together? It's understanding that there's this, there's this, there's this, there's that, and understanding the routines and the things you need to put in place in order to nurture all those aspects of you. And none of them are shame-based. They're all just you.
Yeah.
But that's what I was meaning by bringing them together.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, and I always say don't trust anybody who says that they've mastered their ADHD. Because
oh my God.
But it's funny because I think a lot of the time, I certainly experienced this in the past before I was diagnosed. Like, I would use those days where I had all rockets firing and plates spinning, and I loved that version of myself. So I would use that version of myself as evidence for why I should always be that version of myself. And so I think it was because it was the best. I got off on people saying, how do you do all these things, right? Like, it was such a huge part of my identity. And so it was really difficult to say, well, I also am the person who can't get off the couch, who wears the same clothes for 3 days in a row and doesn't shower. Like all of the fact that I was also that person and had so much shame around that, I felt like, I didn't want that person to exist. And now I feel like they live in harmony a little bit more. Where rather than feeling like I always have to be on, recognizing that with one comes the other, that they need each other.
Yeah, I 100% hear you, Katie. And I think that, for me, I always say nobody gets off a comfortable sofa. So why is anybody going to change unless it becomes unlivable. And, my highs, which I thrived on, the lows were getting lower, the highs were getting higher, and the two were missing completely. And then there's all these people in between trying to figure out which one you are. And I think you only really seek help or seek clarification when it's too much, and I think that also one of the things I'm very passionate about is the stigma around it, because I think more people would want to understand themselves better if you didn't have to be labeled, or you didn't. Now, I believe in, so there's a difference between being labeled and stigmatized. If there was better language around understanding the way our brains work and the difference, how we process things differently. And I think it was that understanding that has also made me feel really passionate about trying to get people to understand that it's the processing of the brain. Why should we be judged and ostracized, and why is there so much shame around it? And for me, that's a big thing. And now, as I've got more comfortable, and when I say comfortable with who I am and being able to balance those things more, not being comfortable in the world and getting it all right. That's not what I'm saying at all, because that's never going to happen. It's about sort of using the challenges and our resilience and everything else. But I think it's also made me realize that those of us that have got to this point, we have an opportunity to change the narrative and to share our stories. And one of the things that always happens is that people talk about how fantastic it is and how great the journey is, and how I've become a coach in ADHD, or in business, or a coach of this or that. I mean, I couldn't coach a couch because once I get on it, I have hard to get off it. But the point being is that it's an everyday thing for me. And if anybody thinks there's a silver bullet, or if anybody thinks there's a pill, or if anybody thinks there's the perfect anything, then you must go and really think about the diagnosis again, because there isn't that. Life is full of challenges, and I think our generation didn't get that memo. Well, I certainly didn't in South Africa, in apartheid South Africa, where everything was perfect. And we were living in this absolutely horrific injustice regime, which I started to feel as a young girl. That life was not fair, and that life was tough. And, I often think, why didn't we get that before we came out, and got told actually what life was? And so I think it's that acceptance that we're not going to feel joy all the time, and we're not going to be that successful person all that time. And I think about, the person who we just hide away from the world. I have to close my bedroom door when I'm traveling because I don't want anyone to see what it looks like. And it's that recuperating side of ourselves, or the realness of ourselves, that we don't want to show other people. But actually, that's what we do need to show, because that's life. And I think that in the world that we live in today, in such an uncertain world, in such a leaderless world, and in a world devoid of humanity and the humanness of people, I think showing the truth and the realness, rather than the success that is the Googled success. Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think, what goes hand in hand with that is the irony of the stigma against ADHD, which is you can't possibly have ADHD because you did well in school or you run businesses or, all the reasons why so many of us weren't diagnosed, because oftentimes we say, well, you can't possibly have it because of all these wonderful things you've done. Now I realize that those are most like those are the people that I immediately think they must have ADHD, right? If you're an entrepreneur and you run a business, you probably have ADHD, but you're probably also in AA, right? And or like there is all of the stuff that comes with it. So yes, all of the substance abuse, all of the stuff that so many of us, eating disorders, so many of us deal with these things in the shadows, but it's so true. Like they it's like they both have to exist, and so you need to look for that and assume that if somebody is running a business, if somebody is phenomenal, if somebody is that person that you think, wow, I don't know how you do all of that in one day, then that person is also probably compensating or deeply struggling or not. I mean, hopefully, ideally, you get to a place of self-acceptance and self-trust and all of that. I actually want to get back to what you had said about AA, because substance abuse is something that is many we talk about a lot on the podcast. Many of us have troubled past, whatever you want to call it. But you mentioned that that one of the things that you struggled with AA is that this idea that there were character defects that you needed to get over, or that you needed to rise above, and that those were things that you sort of looked at in yourself as being great characteristics about yourself. Correct? Like, can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, I must just say that I think AA is one of the most extraordinary organizations, if not the most extraordinary organization in the world, because it is one alcoholic talking to another. And as you and I have learned in our relationship, is one ADHD person talking to another, we get each other. We laugh at the same things. And in AA, it gives people the space. And AA is responsible for getting more people sober than anything else in the world. And I wouldn't be sitting here today if it wasn't for Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm still a member of it, and I still go. And people say, really? After 20 years, do you still crave a drink? And I'm like, no, it's not about that. It's about the community, and it's about the rituals, and it's about the routines, and it's about seeing like-minded people. But I think over the years, what I've come to be able to understand is what works for me and what doesn't. So a lot of it is talking about character defects, and a lot of the madness is what makes us who we are, and madness, I do that in inverted commas because I would like to be able to quote now out of AA, but of course I can't remember, so I can't quote. But the financial insecurity will leave us. Well, I've never been so poor, and yet I'm running a big business, and the promise. So there's a lot of contradictory things, and there's sort of this way about AA that is, you have to stay in the program to stay sober, and you have to accept these character defects, and you have to do this, and you have to do that. And I understand those rituals and routines are absolutely essential to set up a good foundation for sobriety and for mental health going forward. But I wasn't prepared to constantly be a defected character, because I wasn't defected. I was different, and I was unique. And what's the word they now call me with gray hair? That you're eccentric. Now I can be eccentric, and people stand up on the bus and give me their seat. And it was those very things that made me a success. And so I think that, and what I also said to myself quite a long time ago was, I would hire a sober alcoholic any day, or an alcoholic in recovery, over somebody else. but I didn't understand what I was saying at the time. What I was saying is I would hire a new neurodivergent person because I believe 80, 99%, if not 100% of people in AA are neurodivergent. That means our alternative brain processing system works. And that's the world that I think is the future. So, and the world has been created by predominantly white male neurotypical people. That's what the framework, shall we put it, and the framework of marriage or the framework of society. Well, look, I tried marriage for 6 weeks. It didn't suit me. These kind of things don't work for all of us. And I think that the more we are, so the mavericks, you talk about the successes. So Steve Jobs, for example, I'll use him. He was a maverick. People hated or loved him. He was clearly neurodivergent to the extreme, but he changed the world. And I think those are the people that can and do, but it's not easy. And I can tell you that as a business owner and, as somebody who is seen as a success and who has brought something into the world that wasn't there before. And it's been a magic because 16 years, no, it hasn't been magical. It's been bloody tough and difficult. Mm-hmm. And only if I was a neurodivergent would I actually have survived it. And so the Google side of it looks fantastic. But, it takes these different ways of thinking, and that I call it magic. I don't know what it is, but that, those rapid fire connections, and that the lack, we risk takers. I mean, totally risk takers, because we don't see the consequences at the time. We may have them later, but that's what it is. Is it easy to live with a person like that? Good heavens, no.
Yeah, I know, right? I always say I jump first, think later. And, people will say you're brave. And I'm like, I'm not brave. It's like you said, it just never occurred to me to think about whether I should or shouldn't do this until it was too late. And, sometimes it goes great. Sometimes it's a flop. And it's all of those things.
Interesting, Katie, you said it's a flop, but I don't think that. I actually think, and now that I look back, no, actually, I mean, I look back and I was cringing at some things this morning when I was thinking about, what do I regret? And I could die at some of the things I did. But I think that what I've learned on this journey is that everything is information. So if you can take, does that sound like somebody you know? If you can take that flop you talk about, that pancake flop, and learn from it, and that's what I'm loving, is learning from those flops. And something so funny, but I developed this product called a Wonderbag. And I mean, 16 years ago, I had no idea that I was ADHD. All I know is that my friends used to say to me, how many more inventions do we have to have? How many more earthworm farms do we have to try out? How many more this or how many more that? And when I took them the Wonderbag, I said, this will be the last. And my interest-based brain kicked into this product. And I only connected last week that it is the biggest hack for cooking for people like us. It's amazing. But I'd never connected those dots. So actually, so many of the things that I do and have been doing for the past years, like knitting, for example. I'm an obsessive knitter. Everyone says, what do you make? Oh, nothing. Well, but you're knitting all the time. I don't know, squares, this, that, they. Somebody, I'm going to make them into a huge blanket. It'll probably cover the house one day. But I just knit for because, and then I've now learned that that actually brings the left and the right brain together and it calms your nervous system down. So it's funny how these things that you didn't know were sort of ADHD hacks. We're going to learn a new term for ADHD, and we're going to get that out to all the universities so we can lose that terminology. But all these life hacks, and I think when you take that magic of our personality with that huge downside of the depression, the burnout, the hatred of yourself, the low self-esteem, the all of that, and you're able to kind of balance it a bit more, then you can start to have fun with it. And that magic I talk about, I love that magic because I love what's the universe going to bring next. And I think that I was just struggling so much for so long that magic never used to appear anymore, and so, yeah, and it's not there every day either, let me tell you, but it's certainly, I think the greatest gift I ever did myself was to go and ask somebody and have a look at my brain type. And yeah, it's been amazing.
Oh yeah, tell me more about that. So you had a brain scan?
No, brain type, like the functioning of your brain.
Oh, okay, sorry. I thought
Oh
maybe
no,
you
I
had had
did
like
have a brain scan. I had all of those things because I thought there was something clinically wrong with me. And one of the things, and this goes back over time. So, I've filled out many questionnaires in different places, and one of the things that they ask you is, do you have long-term friends? And I went to boarding school and have been very gifted and grateful that I've had lifelong friends and friends that have been with me for 30 or 35, 40 years now, longer. And I'm going away with them all for a week in 2 months' time. So we're all still together as friends. And I was always so proud I could tick that because I thought that will keep me out of the mental institution, and because that was the main questions was, if you have long-term friends, it means you're not a lunatic. Basically, that was the old-fashioned language. And also when I was 18, I was diagnosed by our GP as depressed and this and that. And he said to my dad, your daughter needs help. And my dad said, absolute rubbish, nothing wrong with her. She drinks too much, but nothing wrong with her. And the doctor said to my dad, but if Sarah had cancer, would you help her? And he said, of course I would. And he could not accept in those days that mental health was an issue, was a real thing. And so I think, so that made our inner voices constantly suppressing. So when I started the journey of trying to look for what was wrong with me, I went for, brain scans. I went for MRIs. I went for, looking for tumors that were making me, but there was nothing there. Mm-hmm. I think we look in the wrong places.
Yeah, it amazes me that having that question for so much of our life and neurodivergence, ADHD just never came up. Like, it is tremendous to me how far we have come in such a short time in terms of having this language that you've talked about, right? Like that we can say, like, oh, like, now I think about all those knitters all the women who were knitting in the PTA meetings, they all had ADHD, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
All of those ways in which we intuitively developed hacks for our nervous system, and nobody had any clue.
But I do think a huge contributor to, I think that mental health, ADHD, ADD, dyspraxia, dyslexia, all the things that I've got, and they've been around forever. But first of all, you stayed in your communities and you knitted or you did whatever, and things were so much smaller. But I think that social media and I'm speaking purely for myself. I'm 54 years old, so I'm old, and I didn't grow up with technology. And for me, I think this has exacerbated bringing this out so much. So there's two ways to look at it. One is that a lot has happened in a short space of time and around the language and making it accessible to more people. However, I also do think that one of our biggest and my biggest challenge, and I'm getting much better at it, is learning to manage technology around me. Not managing to use it better, but to switch it off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that, just I see it so much with the younger generation, but sort of between me and my children. I guess it's younger millennials or older Gen Z, older Gen Z. I can't remember now, but really, really struggling with social media and mental health. And I think it's going to be a defining part of their generations, much like the defining part of Gen Xers. Generation is kind of bringing mental health to the fore, right? And looking after reparenting ourselves, because our parents, their generation was the like suck it up generation, and don't come home until the streetlights are on, or all the ways in which we were abandoned emotionally by our parents. And so yeah, anyway, that's a whole other tangent. I want to actually get back to your childhood a little bit, with the social justice element, because I think that's a big thing with ADHD and neurodivergence is really feeling intense empathy. And you grew up in a very, very difficult time, what's the euphemism, of apartheid South Africa, and you had actually ended up going into politics in your 20s, right?
Well, actually, I spent my first night in jail when I was 15.
Mm.
Um, because, yeah, social, see, and these are all the things we don't know that are part of our great different way of our brain functioning. Is I acutely felt social injustice from the minute I can remember. I just did not understand why Black people and white people were different. I did not understand why boys were more important than girls. I could not fathom this thing out. And what was interesting is the rest of our household, I've got 3 siblings, they weren't fazed by it, or not from what I could observe, but I was vehemently like, this has to change. And so, yeah, I became political very young. And I think it was also my parents got divorced when we were young. And so as the oldest sister, I sort of sat up and I suppose took a lot of the responsibilities of the female of the house. But then I started taking on the responsibilities of the world. I had to save South Africa from apartheid. And so, yeah, I went to jail. I started challenging everything from the ANC were banned, their books were banned. I would hide the ANC books that I'd got in London in our private girls' school library so that no one could find them because nobody thought they would be hidden there. Anyway, all of these things, and this has defined my life. And one of the things that my brothers used to always say to me is, why are you so sensitive? You take everything so personally. And I did, and I do, and I feel things, and I have this deep empathy, particularly around children. And, I never wanted another little girl to feel how I did and to be ostracized and to feel so alienated for whatever reasons. And so still today, I mean, that's what drives me. That's what drives my activism at this current time in Gaza. It drives my activism as a humanitarian across the world. And it's driven the deep determination to equalize the status quo. And that's why I started a business based on humanitarian principles, because I believe that every woman has the right to be able to provide food and for their daughters to go to their children to go to school. And so as we do, we take on the biggest challenges in the world, which 16 years ago and still is today, is that half of humanity eat off open fires. And those are people living in rural areas most affected by climate change. And so, you know, my job and my business has taken me to the forefront of conflict zones, of all sorts of things. But what I've learned through my ADHD, or alternative brain processing system, is that I manage brilliantly in a crisis. I mean, Katie, how do you manage in a crisis?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like it's when we're all just absolutely it's the only time my brain is quiet is when you zone in, right? Yeah.
And isn't it so funny that I've been gifted enough or lucky enough or whatever to be able to use those skills in my workplace. And so, yeah, so I think definitely my childhood defined who I am today. And, you know, that deep sensitivity we have, and the feeling of social injustice and inequality, and those things that we feel so deeply can also be catalysts for social impact businesses, which I think the next generations are going to be at the forefront of. But then on the other hand, something that I've spoken to you about previously is the rapid fire connections that we make when we're connecting and magic's happening and we kind of figuring out a strategy. It also happens the other way though. So we feel that intensity of all this negativity, and it just completely can be overwhelming. And there are times when I break. I break because I don't understand how things can be in the world that they are. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's a lot of what's happening in the world is an assault to our senses.
Yeah. And I think, you know, it's natural for us to question convention at every turn, right? I think that's something I've certainly seen over the course of my life, even from when I was a child, always questioning, but why are we doing it? Why would we do this? It makes no sense, right? And so so then you would rise up and against injustice on anyone. And I've often talked to, like, I remember talking about the too muchness of the world, in terms of how it deeply affects us in terms of our ability to process and self-care. Like, it's, you know, there were times where people would never have any idea what I was talking about with the too muchness. Right. And because one, like you said, because one thing becomes all the things very quickly. And I think
that's well said. Yeah.
And so that's the next part of my question, is because you've been so involved in Gaza, and because you have been really standing up and you know, doing such amazing things with Wonderbag and with carbon credits and all of the things that you've been working on now since your diagnosis, how do you take care of yourself? How do you regulate in that? Not saying it works every time, because nobody's mastered it, but
no.
But what have you learned to do? Right?
Well, I think, you know, I spent my life feeling like I was being chased by a lion. And having worked and lived in the bush and actually be chased by a lion on horseback, that adrenaline that you get from that being chased is what I've had all the time. So these imaginary voices in my head or whatever they are constantly telling me I'm not good enough. You haven't done your emails. This has to happen and that has to happen and this goes, and then you get in such a spin, and so you are constantly on overdrive. And I was constantly feeling that I just was never on top of things. My in tray was always too overfull. Well, it was, I didn't even have an in tray because everything was lying all over the place. And so I just constantly felt on my back foot all the time. And I think what I've learned is that the world's not going to end if I don't answer an email today. And strangely enough, as disorganized and as sort of all over the shows I come across, I have very, very rigid routines. So I have to give myself time in the morning where nobody can disturb me, and I do my ritual, of my morning pages or whatever I do. Cold water swimming has been a huge thing for me. And I actually want to mention this because I've lived in chronic pain my entire life. And that took up, I think, half of the energy. So the lion was chasing me on the one side, the pain was biting me from the other side. You don't have much wiggle room for other stuff, so you're constantly reeling. And those two things have gone quiet, and that's open space for me. And I really put my pain down to three things. One is sugar. Second is, and I do break the sugar, and within 3 days I do know that my pain is sore. Cold water swimming. I haven't had a hot shower since 2020. I never ever. I will have a warm bath because that's soothing and nurturing for me, and I need that. But when I shower, it's only cold, and I'm always looking for cold water to swim in. And the third big thing is finding somebody who is like you, like me. So another ADHD person that I have an hour with every week. And it is absolutely golden, and it's sealed in a tight box because I have a safe space that I can go to and share. And I suppose it's the AA of ADHD, if you want to put it that way. So yeah, I've forgotten the question now, of course, but this thing of going on and on, people must think we're mad. And also another thing is interrupting. It drives me mad when people interrupt these days, because I want to say, have you had a diagnosis?
Well, for me, the most difficult thing is when people ask me, like, do you have an episode where you talk about burnout? And I'm like, well, all of them, but like, I can never decide what to call these conversations, because we jump around so much, and everything is, I feel like we're going on that wall with all the red string everywhere, right? Like everything is connected. And so we're jumping around so much that I'm sort of like, I don't know, we probably talk about all the things every episode. So good luck to you. But I did want to come back to that, the line that we talk about often, which is when we first met, when you first came to me, you said, I think I'm approaching burnout. And do you remember what I said to you?
You've gone into burnout long ago. The lion's even half and eaten you. But I haven't had burnout like that since.
It's true. And I think even with the recent chronic pain flare up too, that, I mean, it had been more than a year of that, right? I mean, of really just understanding how important regulation is, and that your life is never not going to be chaotic, but it's how you respond. It's how you treat yourself in those moments, right? Like, I don't have to get back to these people. What's the worst that's going to happen, right? Yeah.
And I also think you save a lot of time not being in burnout, burnout takes a lot of time, because, even today, I had planned my day meticulously for this meeting, and and I had meetings, but anyway, it all got messed up with different time zones. I did half my makeup. I went out to a meeting. I had, anyway, and I I I started to. I was with my accountant, and he was talking. I couldn't hear what he was saying, and I could feel my heart pounding, and I could feel I was having an anxiety attack. And the effort, the poor man had to drive me home in the end. But the effort to come down from that panic attack, and the effort it takes to come out of burnout, we're saving all that time to put into constructive routine of rest, play, knitting, staring out the window, realizing we can't figure it all out now, so we'll wait till tomorrow. I'm like a very relaxed, chilled person these days, sometimes.
Well, on that note, you gave me a little hint into how you might rename ADHD, and I think I'd love it. Can you tell me if you could come up with a better name for this superpower?
Alternative brain processing system.
I love it. I really love that.
And I think I'm going to say, they say, what are you? I mean, what do you have, or whatever? I'm going to say, I have an alternative brain processing system. How cool is that?
It is. It's really great. There's no stigma attached. I love the fact that it's got a little bit of the data from Star Trek, right? Like a little bit of that, like,
absolutely.
I live among you humans, because I often feel that way, right? Where I'm like, what would a human do in this situation? So right, it's like we have
alternative brain processing systems. It was interesting because on Friday I was at a meeting with people that have been particularly difficult to work with, and I wasn't sure how to deal with the meeting, and they were late for the meeting, and they were rude to start with, and I said, I have to explain something to you. I don't really do rudeness anymore, and also I don't like the way you speak to me, and I don't like the way you turn up 20 minutes late, and I don't think I want to do business with you, so I'm going to give you an offer, and maybe we can go our own ways. And they looked at me and they said, that's so unprofessional. I said, really? What does unprofessional mean? I don't understand that word. I only understand truth and honesty. You cannot believe how now we're best friends. They want to do another deal with me, and we're all going out for lunch next week and everything. And I just took away the bullshit, and so I think that's what we have to do, is have alternative processing systems, because the processing systems that we are forced into don't work for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And somebody needs to question convention, right? It's what's that famous quote about tradition is the oppressor's excuse? I think that person was definitely neurodivergent who said that. Do you remember who said that? Anyway,
no, I don't. But one of the things I do know, Katie, is that the neurotypical world is going to have to change, because where I look all around me now, the people making impact, the people moving the dial, are not the people that are going to drive this transition. I mean, you call us the Gen X, I think I call us Gen T, the generation of transition, because we having to transition across a whole thing and set new pathways, neuro pathways for generations to come. And I think that's our responsibility, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Oh, well, this has been phenomenal, Sarah, as I knew it would be. Thank you so much for finally agreeing to sit down with me.
No, and I said I'm never going to do this, But I'm really excited, Katie, because I really am proudly joining the neurodivergent community, and I'm enjoying speaking about it publicly. I'm enjoying sharing it with partners who just are so horrified, and then suddenly it dawns on them, now they understand. And it's really fun to be able to share that side of it. And I think also to be able to forgive ourselves, I think that's a huge part of this, of forgiving imperfection. And yeah, I'm really excited. I'm excited for this journey I'm on. And I know it's only just begun 18 months ago, whatever, but and yeah, I can't thank you enough, Katie, for being so amazing and bridging so many worlds, and making sense of the nonsense.
Oh, I like that. Okay, no, before we go, I want to remember to just go back to Wonderbag, because I know Wonderbag is your brainchild. It's been 16 years. That's incredible. Where can people are now in North America? Can you purchase Wonderbags? You used to
Yeah,
be able
you
to, you can.
can. Yeah, so it's basically a portable slow cooker. So you bring your food to the boil, you put it inside the bag, and it continues to cook for 8 to 12 hours. Now, if you're me, I bring my rice to the boil and I go downstairs, and then I go for a swim. And when I come back, there's a catastrophe in the kitchen, or even my boiled eggs. Now, anything I put on the stove, I bring to the boil and I put it in the bag, and I never have to worry about it again. And I've had a hugely dysfunctional relationship with food. And I mean, I'm not trying to punt the business, but I just know that a Wonderbag will be an amazing game changer for people who have heard us, because then they're part of us, and for anybody really. And you can go onto our website, which is Wonderbag World. And then I think, Katie, I have emailed a code to you to offer 20% off to your listeners and their friends. Of course, can't remember the code. Woman ADHD 20.
Right.
Is that
Yes.
right?
Women ADHD 20. I'll put that code in the show notes. Thank you. That's very generous. It's such an
Yeah.
incredible invention and service, and to be able to see it not only, to extend beyond Africa into places like Gaza now, and to see that connection of the social justice with invention, I think is just phenomenal, and screams ADHD now that you actually know what ADHD is, right?
Isn't it funny? And when Time magazine listed me as one of the top 50 genius companies in the world in 2018, everyone was like, you hopeless at business. You can't finish it. And now it's like that ADHD genius. That's what they were talking about, not your sort of clink, clink, dollar, dollar, which is what everybody thinks success is about. Anyway, this has been amazing, Katie. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for being my partner on this journey. It's amazing.
Well, thank you for your curiosity and your insight and your vulnerability, and sharing your realness and all the things, and giving a voice and spreading the word, and doing all the amazing things you do. So thank you, Sarah.
Take care, Katie.